It was a quiet afternoon at my lake cabin when the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. I never expected the woman standing at my door would be a thorn in my side. Little did I know, she wasn't just any neighborhood Karen. She was about to walk right into a meeting with the state attorney general. Talk about a wrong place, wrong time. But as the drama unfolded, everything turned upside down. What happened next will leave you questioning how far people will go to prove they're in charge. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. It all started on a sunny afternoon when I decided to escape the chaos of everyday life. After months of endless work and stress, I finally found the perfect refuge, a secluded lake cabin tucked away in the woods. It was far enough from the city to offer the peace I craved, but close enough for an occasional trip to town when I needed supplies. The lake shimmered under the sun, and the air was crisp with the promise of tranquility. It was everything I had hoped for, the perfect place to unwind and recharge. But of course, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. The first hint that I might have stepped into something complicated came in the form of a letter from the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The letter, stiff and formal, accused me of violating several community rules. It seemed harmless at first, just a few petty things about landscaping and parking, nothing too serious. I figured they were just being nitpicky, and I would easily clear it up. But little did I know, those minor infractions were about to snowball into a much bigger issue. The day I met Karen, the HOA representative, I had no idea what I was in for. She knocked on my door with a level of authority that I hadn't expected from someone who had nothing more than a clipboard in hand. At first, I thought she was just another neighbor with a chip on her shoulder, but as she spoke, I felt the tension building. She wasn't just a by-the-book enforcer. She was intent on making me feel small. Her demands were ridiculous, and the way she spoke left no room for negotiation. Then came the real kicker. She insisted on performing a formal inspection of my property and threatened fines if I didn't comply. I wasn't about to let some stranger come in and dictate how I lived in my own home, but I didn't have time for her games. That day, I had a far more important meeting scheduled, one with the state attorney general himself. He was coming over to discuss some serious local legal issues, and I wasn't about to let Karen ruin that dot and then. Just as I was about to close the door and get back to preparing for the meeting, I saw her again. There she was, standing on my doorstep with her arms crossed and that same entitled look on her face. She didn't realize that she was about to walk right into a situation she would never have imagined. The man she was about to meet inside my cabin wasn't someone she could push around. I opened the door expecting a casual confrontation, but instead was met with an immediate rush of hostility. Karen wasn't standing there with the usual neighborly politeness. No, she barged in as if she owned the place. Without asking, she began making demands about my property. "You have several violations," she snapped. "I'm here to make sure you're aware of them." Her voice was sharp, and the authority she tried to project was heavy in the air. I could feel her eyes scanning the interior of my cabin, judging every detail as if I were the one trespassing on her turf. I stood there, trying to keep my calm, but my frustration was rising. I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. "I'm not interested in an inspection today," I said, holding my ground. "I have an important meeting, and I don't have time for this." I tried to close the door, but she shoved it back with force, stepping inside like she had every right to be there. Her face was hard with determination, and I could feel the tension between us thickening with each passing second. "Too bad," she muttered. "I'm not leaving until this is sorted out." She walked deeper into the cabin, her gaze piercing every corner as if looking for more faults to point out. My patience was thinning, but I didn't want to escalate things. Still, I couldn't let her dictate the situation. Just as I turned to call for backup, the doorbell rang. I froze. This wasn't just any visitor. The person on the other side wasn't a neighbor or a random stranger. It was the state attorney general, the very man I'd been waiting to meet. I was still caught off guard by Karen's intrusion, and now, the timing couldn't have been worse. But as I opened the door to greet the attorney general, Karen turned, her face shifting from the arrogance she had been displaying to an expression of confusion. She stared at the man standing on my doorstep, unsure of what to make of him. "Who's this?" she asked, her voice suddenly shaky. Her eyes darted back and forth between the attorney general and me. sensing that something was off. It was in that moment that I realized the full scope of how much this situation had backfired on her. She had no idea who she was about to face, and I had to admit, it felt good to watch her uncertainty spread. I stepped aside, inviting the Attorney General inside, and watched as Karen's facade cracked even further. She was no longer the confident HOA enforcer. She was just a woman who had walked into a storm of her own making. The situation was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Karen stood in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with disbelief, as the Attorney General settled into the chair at the table. His presence seemed to immediately command the space. Karen wasn't sure what to do next. Her hands twitched, and she glanced from me to him, clearly weighing her options. It was as though she hadn't expected anyone to stand up to her, especially not someone with this much authority. She hesitated, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I took a breath and looked her in the eye. "You've made your demands clear," I said, my voice firm but calm. "But now you've crossed the line by barging in here uninvited." My words hung in the air, and Karen's jaw clenched. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on all of us. The Attorney General raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the growing animosity between us. "This is a serious matter," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "What's going on here?" His eyes never left Karen, and the way he spoke made it clear that he wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense. I quickly explained the situation, detailing how the HOAS regulations had been nothing more than a series of petty demands. As I spoke, Karen tried to interject, but the Attorney General silenced her with a single glance. It was a simple but powerful move, and Karen seemed to shrink under his gaze. He turned to her, and for the first time, I saw him assert his authority. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you've overstepped your bounds. You have no right to demand entry into someone's private property without proper cause, and this behavior is unacceptable." His voice was steady, calm, and unyielding. The entire room fell into a heavy silence as Karen processed what he had just said. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't in charge anymore. For a moment, I thought she might finally back down, but instead, she stood there defiant. Her face turned red with frustration, and she threw her hands up in the air. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice filled with indignation. "The HOA rules are clear." The Attorney General's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not here to debate rules," he said, his tone unflinching. "I'm here to make sure they're enforced properly. And in this case, they're being used to bully and intimidate people." His words were like a verdict. Final and unwavering. It was a turning point. Karen's power had evaporated in an instant. She had underestimated not only me but the man sitting across from her. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and for the first time, Karen seemed completely out of her depth. Karen's stubbornness had finally met its match. The air in the room seemed to thicken as the Attorney General's words rang clear. The power that the HOA had wielded over the community, built on intimidation and petty rules, had suddenly hit a wall. The truth was undeniable. Karen had no real authority to push around someone who knew their rights and was determined to stand firm. She tried to argue, her voice shaky with frustration, but with each word she spoke, it became more apparent that she was losing ground. Her confidence, once so sure and unyielding, was slowly crumbling under the weight of the truth. The Attorney General didn't need to raise his voice or make grand gestures. His calm, measured words were enough to strip her of the false power she had built. I watched as she stumbled for a response, her face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. She was cornered now, and she knew it. She'd walked into this cabin expecting to bully me, expecting me to bow to the pressure of her HOA rules, but she hadn't counted on facing someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. The Attorney General's presence, his words, his quiet authority, it all served as a reminder that there were limits to how far she could push. The Attorney General, though calm, didn't mince words. He made it clear that the HOAS authority had to be exercised with fairness, not with the intention to harass or intimidate homeowners. "If you continue down this path," he warned, his voice unyielding, "legal action will be taken. You have no right to interfere in someone's private life to this extent. You can't bully people into submission." His words were not just a warning to Karen. They were a declaration that her reign of petty tyranny was over. For the first time, I could see the fear creeping into Karen's eyes. She was no longer in control of the situation. The power she had used so recklessly against others was gone. And it wasn't just me who was standing firm now. She was up against someone who had the authority to back up every word. The shift in the room was palpable. Karen wasn't dealing with some helpless homeowner who could be intimidated. She was facing someone with the means to end her harassment for good. She took a step back, and for a moment, it seemed like she might give in. But that moment passed quickly. She muttered something under her breath, her words barely audible, but filled with a bitterness that only revealed how much she hated losing control. With one last defiant look, she turned toward the door. As she walked out, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare, the tension, the constant battle, it was finally over. The door clicked shut behind her, and the room felt lighter. The Attorney General turned to me, his expression softening just slightly. He gave a small nod, acknowledging the situation. "That was well handled," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I'll make sure the HOA knows they can't get away with this." His words were reassuring, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long was lifting. With Karen gone, the storm had passed. It was like a curtain had fallen on a difficult act, and everything suddenly felt calmer. The meeting that I had originally planned, the reason I'd invited the Attorney General in the first place, continued without a hitch. The issues with the HOA, which had been a looming threat, were resolved swiftly and decisively. In that moment, I realized that the peace I had sought when I first moved into the cabin had finally arrived, not just in the form of a quiet retreat, but through standing up for myself and finding the strength to challenge the forces that had tried to hold me down. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The whole situation had begun as a simple conflict over a few HOA rules, but had turned into something much bigger. It was a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just solve a problem, it can change the course of your entire life. And with that, I knew the cabin would finally be mine, free from the shadows of petty rules and intimidation. The storm was over, and peace had returned. What a day. Karen thought she could walk into my cabin and control everything. But the state attorney general had other plans. How far would you go to stand up for what's right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more on QZ stories.